I would like to talk about who the panelists are today, right before Secretary Duarte comes in to give his remarks. First, we have Joseph Humeyer, the Executive Director of the Center for Secure Free Society. Joseph is a former combat veteran from, he's from the Virginia area, but he served in Iraq. And he's been on the forefront of research in Latin America for the last decade plus, originally at Atlas Network and then at the Center for Secure Free Society, which he founded a number of years ago. So Joseph has recently returned from El Salvador, just there a couple weeks ago. He was in Guatemala in the fall of last year when the migrant caravan was at the peak. We heard a lot about the migrant caravans of about 7,200 people, but in reality it was just one caravan. There were multiple caravans. And so Joseph conducted a considerable amount of field research on the ground there, and he'd be glad to tell you about it during the remarks today. We also have David Grantham, who is the Director of Intelligence for Tarrant County, Texas, and he is our latest Senior Fellow at the Center for Secure Free Society, so he has on-the-ground experience at Tarrant County, Texas, in dealing with migrant issues and the caravans themselves. We also have Todd Benson, who also made the trip from Texas. Both made the trip from Texas for events this week. Todd Benson is a national security expert and a senior fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. He has recent extensive field work in both Panama and Costa Rica, in the region in general, dealing with migrant caravans and interviewing a number of folks. He's been on Fox and Friends and a number of other prestigious outlets talking about his findings down there. And our moderator today is Ana Julio Hatat. And Ana Julio is the editor-in-chief of El Tiempo Latino, which is the main Spanish language newspaper here in the Washington, D.C. metro area. She's a former international fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and she is our moderator. She'll be conducting the panel as Q&A type format for about 45 minutes with the panelists, and you see you have note cards on all your chairs. If you have any questions for the panelists, please do think about them, write them down, pass them to the left or right, wherever is more convenient to pass them, and we'll collect them and give them to Ana Julia, and she'll have an opportunity to ask the panelists those questions. And Mario, Secretary Duarte, who's the Secretary of Strategic Intelligence for the government of Guatemala, he's here. Came in while I was speaking. Okay, so the floor is yours, Secretary Duarte. Gracias. Adelante.
Sorry for the delay. Unfortunately, there is no video or anything to be able to show what I have prepared for you guys, which is a lot of classified information that we were going to share with you. However, I'll try to explain as we go through my speech. Are we going to allow interruptions, or do we just go straight? How are we going to go straight? Straight. All right, awesome. All right. We live in a globalized world, and as regions, nations, allies, partners, or simply as neighbors, we face many constantly evolving threats that have in many cases reached a global scale, and that have morphed into phenomena that do not directly confront our security apparatuses, but that try to use our vulnerabilities against us and take advantage of our humanity, our will to do no harm, and our hearts. Just to mention a few: terrorism, separatism, fanatism, religion, and other forms of extremism, drug trafficking, organized crime, regional conflicts, and the threats of the spread of weapons of mass destruction, financial and economic crisis, ecological disasters, and epidemics. All these problems are not new, but in a globalized world, they are interconnected and have quickly begun to acquire a universal character, posing a real threat to regional and international security and stability. Now, in the past few months, we have seen the famous migrant caravans moving up through Guatemala and Mexico and amassing at the U.S. southern border as they try to force their way into the United States. Now, we have to ask, who is behind these caravans? Were they orchestrated? Who organized them? Who gave them money? Unfortunately, I cannot show you what different intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies and military units were able to collect, not only at the border of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, but also between Guatemala and Mexico, and also Mexico and the United States. So I'm going to go through my notes here because this is where I was going to show you some of the images. But on October 5th, it was made public through social media and using different networks like WhatsApp, a calling in Honduras for citizens to join in a massive migration walk to the United States. From October to date, several caravans have been registered periodically in order to enter the United States. It should be noted that the number of participants has decreased in each new call for a caravan. Now, the initial one that took place in October was about 14,000 migrants that amassed at the border between Honduras and Guatemala. This was not a spontaneous event. It was well planned, it was well organized. We detected a lot of logistical preparation throughout Guatemala and Mexico to be able to bring all these people to the U.S. southern border. I must say that this is open source and it has been throughout the media. And I guess some people decided not to dig into it, but at the end we found out that the main NGO that was behind the caravans is an NGO based out of Chicago, and the name is Familia Latina Unida Sin Fronteras, led by Emma Lozano. Now, they started working with Honduran, Guatemalan, and Mexican counterparts in organizing this. The organization itself was impressive, to say the least. They used mainly WhatsApp, Facebook, to interconnect different people to different groups of migrants that were willing to move and make their walk all the way to the United States. There was a big part of a political participation, mainly in Honduras. We have videotape of all these migrants saying that they would go back to Honduras if Juan Orlando Hernández, the president of Honduras, would quit and renounce his post as president. All that stuff is in video, all that is actually now open source. So there was a lot of political manipulation of all these people on the ground. Bartolo Fuentes was the main leader of the caravan. He came into Guatemala as a scout, sending money to different places, churches, and places where the migrants were going to be staying as they moved up through Guatemala. Also connecting with different international NGOs like Oxfam that also assisted this caravan and has been assisting these caravans as they move up through Guatemala and Mexico to come to the United States. He was captured on October 16 in Guatemala and was deported back to Honduras, where he was received with all sorts of celebration by former President Manuel Zelaya of the Libre political party, who is also the opposition of President Juan Orlando in Honduras. Now, when Guatemala decided to protect our sovereignty, to protect our borders, and we heard the call of the government of the United States to try to contain this forceful migrant caravan. First thing is that not many people know that Guatemala, with the entire Central American region, we have signed an agreement called the C4 agreement, in which we have to allow all Central Americans to freely flow through our countries, with the only condition that they have to be registered at the border. That's the first thing we did, and we started announcing to all these people coming to our border that they were going to have to register to be able to enter to Guatemala. As these people were amassing on our border, unfortunately, Mexican authorities, including at the time President-elect López Obrador, started saying in public that they were going to give all these migrants working visas, and they were going to help them in Mexico, and they were going to receive them, etc., etc. So that emboldened these groups. They emboldened the aggressive, and they became more aggressive. And eventually they broke through our border. We had, I'll give you some numbers, but we had a huge contingent of police officers protecting our border. Unfortunately, these migrant groups put women, the elderly, and children as young as 40 days of age at the front and started pushing and pressing them against our police force. And because we have to obviously protect the human rights of all these people, we could not even use tear gas to try to dissuade all the people in the back, the aggressive people, from moving back, because some of the small people could have hurt the small children. It became an unsustainable situation. Children were being pressed against the fence, and some of them actually were already suffocated because of all the pressure behind them. So we had to retreat. Our police forces had to allow these migrants to go through our border. Unfortunately, Honduras authorities left their posts and left us alone. Instead of having two fences to protect the border area, it was only the Guatemalans holding the line, pretty much. Knowing that this was going to happen, because we had also received intelligence that these people were working with other countries, like Venezuela, in preparing the leaders of these caravans. We also prepared a migrant containment strategy. And what we did is we set up a total of 12 different roadblocks throughout Guatemala all the way to Mexico, in trying to make sure that the caravan wasn't going to freely flow through Guatemala. The idea was really to delay and make the organizers and the logistical operators to waste all their money, to spend all their money trying to feed the people, as we were actually holding them at these roadblocks, checking paperwork, etc. During that work, we also identified a total of 10 operational leaders in the caravan. And some of the results, and just to give you the numbers that we used a total of 1,600 police agents on both our borders in trying to contain this. We used close to 500 military soldiers, or soldiers of our armed forces, and more than 500 first responders and EMT personnel. At the end, with this strategy, out of a 14,000 strong caravan, we managed to peacefully and respecting the human rights, we returned a total of 6,456 Honduran migrants. With all these checkpoints and roadblocks we set up, we were assisting them, giving them water, giving them food, also making sure that our EMTs were checking them on different types of diseases or if they had an emergency. And they freely boarded the buses that we had prepared for them. And this is, for a small country like Guatemala, it's incurring a huge cost, but still, we were being a partner, and we were trying to make sure that this was not just going to be able to freely flow through our country. We also intercepted a total of 126 special interest aliens during this caravans. Special interest aliens, countries, and with broader links to Islamic extremists. At the end, Guatemala did their part. We offered and promised the United States that we were going to contain this. Some of you might have heard already, and this is another big thing that's going to happen within days, again, in this region. As of 2 hours ago, a big group of migrants coming from different countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East are coming through the Darien area between Colombia and Panama and are amassing at the Panama border, including also 400 Cubans. And their intent is to make a 30,000 strong caravan to go all the way up through Central America and Mexico and come to the U.S. southern border. This this new way of doing politics, which is how we are actually analyzing this. We are calling it, and we're using this term. Now it's the weaponization of those in need. Since the earliest times, humanity has been on the move. While some move in search for economic opportunities, others move to escape conflict, persecution, terrorism, human rights violations, environmental factors, just to mention a few. As difficulties, as human beings, as societies, we cannot ignore and remain sensitive to the difficulties others face in life. We cannot ignore how evilness, cruelty, greed, ambition, and corruption have destroyed entire countries and driven our fellow humans to leave everything behind in search of an opportunity to have a life. Unfortunately, cruel, heartless, and manipulative political actors and radicals have taken advantage of those in need and are utilizing them now as less than lethal weapons of invasion, of political influence, and as their own private armies of picketing mobs. That's what this is. Let's not lose our real capacity of analysis. The migrant caravans are not spontaneous. They are being politically orchestrated and well-funded with a specific political objective. Now, we have to make an effort as a region, as partners, to confront this. I started the speech talking about the globalized world and the threats we face. It's been said globalization has the potential to make this world a better place to live and solve some of the deep-seated problems like unemployment and poverty. We can stop globalization, but there are policies and strategies that can be used to make it more equitable and work as allies and as partners. But alliances and partnerships only go as far as our nation's own interests allow it. John Henry Temple and Winston Churchill used different versions of the concept that nations have neither eternal allies nor perpetual enemies, only eternal and perpetual interests. However, today's globalized world presents a reality of intertwined trade economies and futures, and we need to understand that even our own national security and national interests are nowadays tightly interlocked. We need to find a way to work together as nations in order to achieve mutual benefits in pursuit of a win-win situation for all our countries. Let's think for a minute about our neighborhoods, where we live in. In an ideal world, we would hope our neighbors would help us whenever we find ourselves in need, in danger, or at risk. We would hope that if our house is ever getting broken into, and this is the example, if we're in our neighbor and our house is getting broken into, we hope that the kind lady next door is going to call the police as quickly as she usually calls when we have loud music or we really have a very noisy party, right? We hope. And this is the exact same situation. But nothing could be farther from the truth. For the most part, allies, partners, and neighbors will only help us as far as their own comfort zone allows them to do so. But what happens when counterparts build trust and become allies, partners, and friends willing to go the extra mile for each other? And I'm going to use the example of Guatemala specifically. We have the population that uses drugs. Cocaine is less than 0.2% of the population. However, nowadays we are the country that intercepts the most cocaine in the region. Up to last check, 30 metric tons of cocaine has been seized on Guatemalan waters and land. And this being a good partner of those nations that actually do consume this type of drugs. The United States and Europe, for the most part. We're being good partners. We have also, in the last 3 years, intercepted and denied access and flow to more than 100 special interest aliens with links to terrorism organizations. We have also worked hard against the gangs, MS-13, Migrant, that are also they are not only affecting our countries in the Northern Triangle, but also the United States, mainly the East Coast. But that's just some of the stuff we're doing as good partners of the regions, and we're not doing it only for ourselves, but for everybody that we consider our friends and our allies in the region. As nations, we need to find ways to work together and protect our neighborhood and each other against common enemies, common threats, and also against pervasive political ideologies that disguise themselves as political opposition, but that are actively and aggressively working to subvert our stability, our peace, and yes, they're also trying to undercut our friendship, our partnerships, and also trying to belittle the determination with which our soldiers, Marines, airmen, intelligence officers, police officers risk lives on a daily basis in our cities, at our borders, on foreign lands, and out in the sea. I'll give you an example of these. Our naval special forces in Guatemala, they are going out 200 nautical miles into the sea to capture these boatloads of cocaine. And then they have to sit out there for almost 3 days waiting for another boat to bring them petrol and gas. And they're doing it because we are good partners in the United States. A few days ago, I made a comment on the radio and it was misconstrued because some issue with some jeeps we have in Guatemala that the U.S. made it to us. The point I was trying to make that it doesn't matter if the political activists of a certain political party in the United States, once they want to take away whatever assistance, physical assistance, technological assistance, they can take it away from us, but still we will remain the best partner that the United States has in the region. We will keep fighting the drug lords, we will keep fighting the drug traffickers, we will keep trying to curb down this immigration, and we will be a good partner because also whatever, I'm going to use a tagline from someone in the U.S. government, whatever makes Guatemala great will make the United States great as well. I'm going to add some personal ideas here. And if I may, I would like to quote the greatest man who lived and lives, our Lord Jesus Christ. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as you love yourself. I have had the honor of serving 2 countries. And I am convinced that partnerships and alliances based primarily on trust can build real friendships between governments and agencies. And I have seen these on both sides. I immigrated legally to the United States when I was 19 years old. I went to school, earned my permanent legal residency to the United States based on U.S. national interest. I served the United States in uniform and dedicated more than 10 years of my professional life serving and protecting the United States of America. I now serve Guatemala, the country where I was born, and couldn't be doing it if the U.S. had not given me the opportunity to be the best that I can be. Cool. I can say that my soul is Guatemalan and my heart is Texan. Now, seriously speaking though, my heart is not split between the U.S. and Guatemala. It is equally committed to protecting and serving both countries. Being in this position has allowed me to understand that there needs to be a mutual understanding and respect between parts at the most basic level, and an honest willingness to do good, to be able to receive good. But in this particular case, do good means helping your counterpart with what that counterpart needs and wants help with, not with what you think is good for them, not with what you think they want help with. Nobody owns all the answers to all the problems and the solutions to all the problems. Thinking that from some local exposure, limited exposure, and some academic work, and thinking that you have a solution to solve endemic social problems of a host nation is simply arrogant and insulting to all of us. And that's why you have seen so many problems in the Latin American region in the past 20 years. Bad policy, bad foreign policy. I call it career bureaucratic arrogance. People that think they own the truth, people that think know better than what the countries themselves. At the end, friends help with what is needed, not with what they want to give. Globalization has undoubtedly transformed the nature of crime and has made the need for security evident and complex. Reason why we aim to the idea of slowly shifting to a fully integrated region where counterparts cooperate and link to enable communication and collaborate with each other. Therefore, alliances, partnerships, and societies are needed and required to offer a degree of dedication, honesty, and integrity to ensure that these relationships will benefit all the counterparts involved. Every country is different. There is no cookie-cutter solution. This is why we must come together to identify common ground, understand connections to regions, influence factors, social groups. and then plan and prevent and protect each other and protect the region together. Talk to each other and define what we want to accomplish, develop protocols, set agreements, and coordinate to assist and response to our partners' needs. At the end, more than allies and partners become real friends. I'll give you an example of something that happened in Guatemala in 2016. We were facing a lot of forest fires, and we had this unit of 4 helicopters properly in Guatemala. However, they had been repaired by the United States, so we could only use them if the United States Embassy would approve it. President of Guatemala, President Morales, requested those choppers to be used to put out these forest fires before a Guatemalan could lose his life, or we could lose, entire towns. The unfortunate response was that unless the person died, they could not provide those choppers. Guatemalan property. That's bad foreign policy, like I said. But still, we're good partners. We're still fighting. We will keep fighting. If you want to see it, a lot of people say that Latin America is the United States backyard. I think that's simply insulting to the entire Latin American region. We should see this more of, we should see Latin America as a school ground or a house where the United States, in any case, is a big brother. And we're smaller brothers, but brothers nonetheless. We have to fight for each other at the end. We need to come together and understand that we have needs, that we have also obligations, but we need to see eye to eye. At the end, the best solutions will come from those that need those solutions, not that those that want to impose them on us. Thank you. We're ready for the discussion, right? Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Secretary Duarte. That was an excellent presentation. Weaponization of those in need. I don't think I've ever heard it put in such powerful terms and accurate terms that I think we all need to take away from this today. Weaponization of those in need. That's an excellent way to put it. Back in 2005, I was a Pentagon spokesman, and I went with Secretary Rumsfeld to Nicaragua for the Defense Ministerial of the Americas. In fact, several people here today I worked with back in those days, Christina Long and Fox and Martinez, still state. But we had serious issues with mass migration, human trafficking, of course, drugs and gangs in Central America. It was a major concern for us. But now it's taken on such a new dimension. It's much more of a threat to the United States, and it's something that we really need to address in detail. That's why we're doing the event today, because so much of what you've seen in the press, and there has been a lot in the press, it's been one of the top stories since the fall in the United States. On one side, you hear the humanitarian plight of the refugees and the suffering that's going on just south of our border. And on the other hand, you just hear about a wall. But you don't really hear who's in the caravans. What are the details? So that's what we want to accomplish today. Drill down into the details. Who are coming in these caravans? Will they keep coming? What's the answer? What should policymakers do, both in the United States and in places like Guatemala? We're so glad and we're so lucky to have Mario Duarte here today to share with us his wisdom and his on-the-ground research. And speaking of on-the-ground research, we're pleased to have 3 of the foremost experts who have been on the ground doing that research for years. Joseph Humeyer, David Grantham, both an Iraq veteran and an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, respectively. Todd Bensman and Ana Julia have had to moderate the panel. We'll do about 45 minutes of a Q&A session with Ana Julia leading it, and then we'll open it up to questions from your note cards. Thanks very much. Ana Julia.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to start. I think that a good place to start is, and this question is for David. I think that the counter argument that you hear is that, okay, migrants have been coming to the border for years and years, and why is this such a big, political issue right now? Is this being a political issue, or is this a real issue? So I would like to ask David, in your opinion, what is the key difference between, since you've been in Texas, right, what is the key difference that you see between those migrants that came looking for asylum in the past and this, what we are experiencing right now?
Thank you for the question. I think the key takeaway, to keep it short and sweet, is the size and the intensity and the organization behind it. These are, as it's already alluded to, from a Texas perspective, we're seeing a destabilization effort on our border. Those, and what often is missed is it's not just the destabilization effort on the border, but where it manifests itself inland. I'm in Fort Worth, we're about 500 miles north of the border, so often we're dismissed as you have no interest on the border. And what we often argue is that no, what crosses over the border inevitably ends up in Fort Worth and will stay there. We have we're the third most populous county in Texas, and because of that, with our interstate highway system, our housing market, everything encourages people to stay. Unfortunately, traditional migrants that come here for legitimate reasons, and those that may be involved or being manipulated to be involved in these destabilization efforts, they're often the target of the local gangs, and the target of the cartels. They know that they need external support to get where they're at and sustain their efforts locally. So oftentimes they become double victims, if you will, of those using them to hit the border, and then those when they end up in places like Fort Worth, local gangs and local affiliates of the cartels use them again in order to move drugs, in order to do other things, and pressure them with threats of violence. So there's, from our perspective, if you forget everything I've said in this short little diatribe, is that a traditional migration, where there's asylum seekers, in my opinion, over a long period of time, is significantly different historically than having 10,000, 30,000 now, as we learned from 2 to 3 hours ago, of people organized with the sole purpose, or at least those who are organizing them, the sole purpose of disrupting the security of the states and the countries in between where they're at and the Texas or the United States-Mexico border.
Okay, it was mentioned by Secretary Duarte that they are NGOs organizing, as you said. And one of them is, I wrote his name here, Familia Latina Unida Sin Fronteras. I would like to ask Joseph Unide, if there is an organization going on and there are NGOs that are working, who is financing these NGOs? And is the purpose political? Is the purpose just to disrupt the order, as David just mentioned? Or is there also drug cartels involved, as the Secretary mentioned? Who is financing these NGOs and with what purpose?
Well, thank you for the question. Also, thank you for everyone for being here, particularly for Secretary Duarte. Those were very powerful remarks. Let me start with the macro, and I'll see if I can pack it down into a bit of specifically with the NGO network. I think one of the things that we have to, one of the things that got lost in the conversation about the caravans, in the policy world, where think tanks work a lot with policymakers, is the purpose of the caravans from a strategic level. And from our perspective, from what we looked at both on the ground, but also kind of our decades long, looking at Latin America, looking at political forces, even extra-regional forces, we're at an inflection point in the region, and I think the concept of the caravan, the idea of the caravans, it wasn't necessarily just to push migrants as fast as they can to the border, or even to push migrants as fast as they can past the border. From what I can understand, the concept of the caravans is designed to challenge the concept of borders, to blur the lines between borders. Because if you think about that, what do you do when you challenge the concept of a border? Is you challenge the concept of sovereignty. And by extension, if you challenge sovereignty, you challenge the Westphalian system or the world order. And there are clearly nation states, particularly anti-American states, that have an interest to challenge the sovereign state system globally. I would name 3 that are very active in Latin America, which are Russia, Iran, and China. Russia, Iran, and China have partners in Latin America. Now, aside from the economic side, China has plenty of economic partners, but on the political level, Their particular partners are 5 countries, right? Venezuela, Bolivia, Cuba, Nicaragua, and it used to be Ecuador, now it's looking to be more like El Salvador. And so one of the things we have, and this wasn't really discussed publicly in our research, but I'll mention it here, that we do have information that the planning of the caravans, at least partially, took place in August of that year in Bolivia. There was also information, for those in government, I'm sure you know, that part of the financing of the caravans took place in Venezuela. So there was political forces beyond just the NGO networks that had an interest to challenge the concept of sovereignty and to challenge and to blur the lines between borders, because they view that as an asymmetric tool to delegitimize the United States. As far as the NGOs in itself, I don't have the financing of the specific NGOs, but what I can say is this: when we looked at the actual trail of the caravans, it was clear to me that the logistical infrastructure that was set in place to move, at the time, 4,000, I mean, the caravan grew much larger, but at the time, 4,000 migrants from Honduras to Guatemala in 4 days. To move 4,000 people, anyone that served in the military, that's a forced march, like you wouldn't believe, of not too friendly terrain. But to move 4,000 people from one end of the Honduran-Guatemala border to the Mexico-Guatemala border is not an easy task. And so there was already an infrastructure in place in Guatemala to be able to move them, to take care of the migrants, but also to push them along at a rate that they thought was, for whatever reason, it was deemable for the migrants. So I don't have the specifics about the financing of the NGOs, but I know there's an infrastructure, and I know there's a strategic interest of some nation states in the region and outside the region to create destabilization in Latin America.
Let me just, so there is no proof that these countries, that you mentioned, are financing. Is there any proof?
There's proof.
Yeah.
There's not proof I don't have proof right here on me, but the intelligence community has proof of this. I've seen some of this proof. And like I said, my own organization, we don't work with the intelligence community, we don't work with classified information, but even just our own, through research, on-the-ground research, we know some of the actors that were involved in the planning and the financing of this, and they involved the countries that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much. Todd, you were down there, right, in December, right? Yeah. In December. So what Joseph is saying, that the motive is more political, and as he said that it's an asymmetric tool. I believe that you went down there and you had the opportunity to interview potential caravans that were coming from other countries. What is the impression you had there? And what was the feeling? You went thinking what, and you came back thinking what?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and Secretary Duarte's comments were very interesting. I hope I can get a couple minutes before you take off after this. I went to Panama and Costa Rica because in October the president started talking publicly and tweeting about Middle Easterners and potential terrorists coming in through Latin American routes over the U.S. border, and that he was using this as justification for various policies. And it was really the first time that a sitting president had ever talked about such things. The pushback from the media was substantial. Mostly it was that this is baseless kind of fear-mongering, that the migration of people from countries in the Middle East and from other places, North Africa and whatnot, the Muslim majority countries, was not happening at all. So I went down there to do the field research myself to check out, is that happening and how is it happening. And what I found was that in fact it is happening, that there are hundreds of migrants from countries of special interest in the Middle East and North Africa and South Asia that are routinely moving through South America, through the bottleneck country of Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, which is kind of a super highway of smuggling, as you know, into Mexico and into the southern border. The issue there becomes not whether it's happening, but how it's happening and as a response, a Homeland Security response the United States is dealing with that policy. Is that actually a threat? And whether it's actually a threat is a question that can be debated and discussed. What can't be debated is whether the migration is happening. When I was in Panama, what I found was a official policy in Panama and Costa Rica. It's a bilateral policy where those two countries are actually doing the smuggling themselves. They are actually moving in an organized fashion thousands of migrants from South America by bus and ensuring that they are cared for, given medical treatment and transportation from Colombia to Costa Rica and then from Costa Rica to Nicaragua. They have a name for the policy. It's called controlled flow. I was surprised to find this when I was there. I thought that there would be smuggling, so that there was something surprising. I thought that there would be classic black market kind of illicit smuggling at stash houses and that sort of thing. But in fact, it's the governments that are collecting them out of the jungle, putting them in camps, and then putting them on buses, giving them permisos, and then moving them all the way to the Nicaraguan border where the smugglers take back over and move on to Mexico. I personally saw about 250 migrants being moved this way. They were from Pakistan. I met them. They were from Iran. I met Iranians. They were from the Middle East. I met them and interviewed them. Iraq, Lebanon, Bangladesh, and they are going to be asylum seekers. I was able to interview a number of them about their plans and who they were, something a little bit about them, the ones that I could find that spoke English. But the flow is happening. I'm not saying that they are moving with the migrant caravans. I think that we have reporting here today that they are moving with the migrant caravans. If they're not with the migrant caravans at that point, they're certainly on the same trail. They're behind them and they're in front of them. And they are moving here. And the issue is whether or not they're a national security threat. While I was down there, I met with government people and intelligence people who were pulling known and suspected terrorists off that assembly line down there before they ever get here. The Secretary mentioned some of them. I don't know about those numbers. The ones that I talked to, it indicated that there are they're small numbers, but the ones that they are pulling off the assembly line they were on U.S. terror watch lists, and that's why they were pulled off. And they were being deported. 6 Pakistanis I know of, at least several Somalis that I know of, they pulled them right out of a camp in El Calfito, Costa Rica that I visited. So there is an issue, whether it's a big issue or a small issue, we can debate all day long, but there certainly is a Homeland Security issue from the perspective of American intelligence.
Thank you. I guess, is there any comment that the other speakers want to make of what you have listened in this first round of questions?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Todd's saying, since I think me and Todd also spent spent time in Central America looking at the caravans, and it really to complement what he's saying, because I was a little further north, I was in Guatemala, I think Todd was in Panama and Costa Rica, but the very similar, same story, very similar story that was taking place. One of the things that struck me is I had a conversation with one of the migrants, and this is a story that was reflected in other migrants that said something similar, but he said it in a very clear way. Actually, we posted the video actually on our website and on our YouTube. And what he said is, he said that he saw individuals from outside of Latin America. He described them as African, but he described them as having extra financial support, meaning that they don't necessarily always walk along the border, that they are couried through taxis or other vehicles to the border crossings. And once they arrive at the border crossings, there's different albergues, like places where migrant centers where they're treated and they have to wait in line. Well, these specific irregular migrants, that they would actually go to the front of the lines They wouldn't wait. They would be met with a specific handler. They would be taken to specific back rooms. So he described a very clandestine movement of these individuals, which would explain, I think, to some degree why people had such a hard time finding them. I mean, when I was there the last week of October 2018, and pretty much every news agency in the world really was, it was one of the top stories internationally. Every news agency was down there, but I think they had a hard time visualizing them. You might have remembered some of the reports in Univision or in some of the other networks where they said, with the caravans, we don't see any Middle Easterners or Africans or ASA agents. Well, that's because they weren't asking the right people or talking to the right, or in the right locations. And so I kind of echo what that says. I mean, I have a list right here on me. This was not a very difficult thing to find out because the Guatemalan authorities had this information, as did the Honduran authorities. 132 individuals that passed through between the 20th to the 24th of October, none of which are from Latin America, minus some from Haiti. We have 3 from Pakistan, we have 10 from Bangladesh, 2 from Eritrea. So, I mean, these numbers, the documentation was there. And what I noticed is that there was a logistical organization that kind of resembled somewhat of a military movement. As you know, I served in the armed forces, and one of the things you know is about convoys. And the way a convoy moves is you have an advance party that moves up front to get essentially kind of a reconnaissance element. You have a main body, which is the main part that moves through, and then you have a rear party to pick up stragglers or any type of logistical support. And I saw that same kind of structure within the caravans, and the irregular folks, the folks that were not from Latin America, tended to be in the rear party or between the 2 caravans. Like they were hardly ever in the main body, which would also describe why I think a lot of journalists had a hard time finding them, because if you're with the main body, you're more likely not going to see these type of migrants.
I guess that I would like to, so does this mean that we are ruling out all this drug cartel purpose of this? I mean,
From my understanding, and I used to hear what David had to say, because he deals with this much more on a daily basis, but the drug cartels are not particularly happy about these caravans because they provided unneeded attention to routes, things that movements. So this is actually a little bit interesting when we talk about the routes, right? If you were an undocumented migrant from Honduras and you want to come to the United States, the shortest route possible, and there are coyotes and human smugglers that are dedicated to trafficking these routes, go along the coast. It literally is the shortest point A to point B, Texas to Honduras, if you actually just want to get to the United States. If you're a drug trafficker and you want to traffic the drugs into the United States, the Pan American Highway is the fastest way to get to the United States, and actually drug traffickers use these means to be able to get in and move their products efficiently. The caravans went a long route. They went a very long route. They went from Ciudad Hidalgo on the Honduran border to Tucumán, across on the Mexican border, through Mexico City, all the way to Tijuana, California. It was a very, very long route. However, the drug traffickers were clearly trying to stay away from that because it would provide unneeded attention to the business that they're involved in, which obviously doesn't need media or press.
comment?
Well, Joseph mentioned that our intelligence is suggesting the cartels traditionally, and they continue to do this, they're targets of opportunity for them. So while they would not, or at least are not thrilled about the prospect of bringing this kind of attention and disrupting their networks, I believe over time, and I think you've already seen some reporting of this in the news, that the cartels, at least along the border, will begin to take advantage of the opportunities that the caravans are presenting for a multitude of reasons, but one is resource management. And that was already mentioned about Guatemala. 1,600 law enforcement, 500 military, 500 EMTs, just on the border. So the cartels rely on manipulating resource management. So if the cartels can hit a certain spot on the border and then redirect American resources somewhere else, they'll take advantage. The caravans are essentially doing the same thing, so initially there is some competition there with they're directing United States resources and Latin American resources away from traditional areas. And while it may frustrate the cartels, because they are also trying to do the same thing, I think you're quickly going to begin seeing either coordination or you're going to see conflict. A conflict from those who are funding and organizing the caravans with the cartels. If that happens, that's going to be a significant problem, especially for our partners in Central America. If there becomes any sort of conflict or rivalry where they aren't taking advantage of the others' opportunities that present themselves, I mean, that would probably be the most drastic result, but it's still a possibility. It's happening already, so there's already conflict. That, I would say if that's going to be a major
You want
issue.
to add something, Secretary?
Sure. Really quickly, we already saw this. We have already seen this involvement of cartels or small drug trafficking organizations conflicting with the migrant caravan organizers, but also working together. In fact, one of the videos that I have prepared for you shows members of a drug trafficking organization from the southern part of Guatemala actually being the ones handing out the cash to the elder females in the caravan. Basically, they were going to be the group leaders, and they were going to spread the money through the entire caravan. This is, the effect of drug cartels taking advantage of, probably taking commission on that money that was being used. But also on the other side of the border with Mexico, we are seeing these drug organizations trying to push our security forces away from the area where the migrants are, provoking the migrants to become violent and trying to push them to the Mexican side, or trying just to hide throughout the population. Because again, if you see big groups of migrants, we have to have security forces. So we already have seen these effects, both operation but also disruption of the routes and the operations.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to ask a question to the three of you. After what we have been talking here, I would like to hear from each of you in order to answer the main question of this event is, so we have the drug cartels, we have the migrants, we have countries involved, we have people coming from the Middle East. In your opinion, then who are these migrants? Are they all of the above? Are they a mixture, or are they just from, because if this was organized in Bolivia and it was financed by Venezuela, and then China and Russia are involved, the picture looks very complicated, and therefore there is no one answer to this. Okay, so you want to say?
Okay, I'll start. My impression is that the majority of the migrants in these caravans are people that are seeking a better economic opportunity in the United States by the path of least resistance. Even those who are coming from the Middle East and Iran and Pakistan, those countries are not wonderful places a lot of times. And one can sort of assume on the front end that they're going to be asylum seekers, they're fleeing persecution and political unrest and civil war and that sort of thing. The issue is not so much who they are, but whether we can determine who they are from an intelligence perspective. The problem that we know is that some small percentage are going to be MS-13, some small percentage are going to be Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, and we know this. And they're coming to the border uninvited and often without any identification whatsoever. I asked all of the migrants that I met, I asked them, did they have identification? none of them have identification. Nobody has identification. They lost it, got robbed, they got robbed, or whatever. So they show up at the border and say, my name is Mickey Mouse, believe me and believe my story. And we have a problem. We have to figure out how to overcome, from an intelligence perspective, identification. So to determine who they are, and if they have an asylum claim, they can go through, that's valid, they can go through the system, but sometimes they don't. They are bad guys, and they need to be dealt with, through the system as well.
Then just one question before we let you go. So you said that the majority, they are coming, they're looking for a better life. And they, therefore, can contribute to the country. But there are a small percentage, right, that maybe terrorists, Al-Qaeda, whatever, I don't know, political reasons from the left in the hemisphere. Wouldn't the United States have the instruments to filter these people on the border?
Part of the problem with, you're asking if we have the ability to vet them.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is that most of the time, they're not coming in caravans, like big, bold, open caravans. They're sneaking through cities and safe houses and stash houses and through the jungle. And we don't really know who they are until they show up. Sometimes we can catch them down there. When I was in Panama, I found an American program for Operation Controlled Flow, where they were taking biometrics, eye scans, fingerprints. I watched them do it. It's all American provided equipment, and the purpose of that is it's a counterterrorism program. The United States is in Panama looking at this issue not as like some kind of migration issue, but as a counterterrorism issue. And not everybody is coming through above board on the buses. Lots of them are still kind of coming through the jungle, sneaking around. You're not going to know who those people are until you get here. And even the ones who they're taking the retinal eye scans, if they're clean before that, unless they have been on somebody's radar, a foreign government, or somebody that fingerprint off an IED in Iraq, or something lucky, serendipitous like that. Even if we take their retinal, their eyes and their fingerprints and all the rest, it very well may match to nothing. The other issue is you can't just call the Syrian government and ask them to run a criminal background check, or the Iranians. You can't pick up the phone and see if somebody's a pedophile in Somalia, because Somalia has had no record keeping whatsoever for 25 years. They don't even have birth certificates, most of them. So you have a fundamental vetting issue with a lot of the migrants coming from those countries. We don't know who they are, and that's a counterterrorism issue. We treat it as a counterterrorism issue, even though the press says it's not, and nobody treats it as a counterterrorism. That's just not true.
Thank you.
Go back to your questions. Who are these people?
Yes.
I think it was already summed up when it's built into the phrase weaponization of those in need, suggesting that many of those are looking for a better opportunity. When you look at the word weaponization, that tells you somebody is using them, manipulating them for a different goal. That's the issue. And when I sit with some of these people in the jail, and we're interviewing them, we're talking with them, consistently, they recognize they have been manipulated. I'm speaking of those that were brought here illegally. They've relied on nefarious actors to get them here, and they've only paid a worse price in doing so. Instead of looking to encouraging them to stay where they're at, build where they're at, use the same momentum they're using to move forward, stay where you're at. And there isn't, you can see that in the few that I've talked to. You can see them recognizing that now that they're here and now that they're suffering. And it really, from a military perspective and from a family background, my mother's from the Dominican Republic, my grandfather's from Cuba. all of them grew up under some sort of Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. My mother grew up under that. And hearing her stories and watching these people, what's painfully obvious is that those that are manipulating them, they don't care about them. Venezuela does not care about its people, the government. Cuba, same. Iran, same. You look at those, Russia, who's orchestrating these, they do not care. And there has to be a better understanding of those who are being manipulated. And I'm sure there's degrees of this manipulation. Some say, I know and I don't care. This is an opportunity. Others that are completely baffled and confused when they get to the border thinking they actually have a way in. So I'm sure there's a whole range of motivations and misunderstandings. But at the end of the day, the weaponization is the key. Those that are using these people to do this traditionally don't care about their own people, and they sure as heck don't care about the caravans. Now we're seeing, it sounds to me like what we're going to begin having is people brought from other places in the world, probably sheltered and transported from a place in the world, dropped into Latin America, and before you know it, they're going to be on the border of Guatemala. So that's, the weaponization is the key.
Thank you, David. And just for the record, I was born in Cuba, and and my family flew to Venezuela, and I was raised in Venezuela, so I know the beast from inside. Maybe that's the reason I'm sitting here. No, because honestly, just a small comment. When I started listening to these caravans, I'm sure there is Venezuelan money there. I mean, I'm sure, but I haven't seen the proofs yet, honestly, either.
Obviously, there's certain things that I'm not supposed to discuss, but you want to look at PDVSA, I think, in connection to Salvador. You want to look at the financing from that. So
And Nicaragua.
yeah, but particularly Salvador, in the case of the caravans. And from what my understanding is, it wasn't expensive. We're talking about $500,000 for the initial branch of caravans. So that's for anyone that's running these kind of operations, that's a drop in the bucket for a cartel. It's a nice weekend in Miami or something. So I want to double down on what David was saying because
Joseph, could you answer the question, who are these people that are coming? Okay.
well, I agree 100% with David. I think, I think everybody in the panel really, and Secretary Duarte, really, that term, weaponization of those in need are the migrants in the caravan, by large in part. I mean, there's other subversive elements, maybe, some terrorist elements, criminal elements, but that's a small percentage. The majority of them are people that are fleeing something, whether it's an economic situation, a security situation. But history shows us, and this being from Cuba and Venezuela, populations are a big part of warfare. So when you talk about asymmetric warfare, which is, when you talk about weaponization of migrants, that's a form of asymmetric warfare. What's the fundamental difference between asymmetric warfare and conventional warfare? Well, conventional warfare involves militaries. It involves military strength. So in that metric, the United States is a superpower. We have perhaps the largest military arsenal in the world, and that's actually growing, so that's not going to stop. But in asymmetric terms, we are not the strongest in the world. The United States is not the strongest asymmetric force in the world, which is why we lose asymmetric conflicts going back. Why? Because when you turn to an asymmetric conflict, what the military calls the center of gravity, it shifts. It's no longer militaries. It's now popular opinion and political legitimacy. So if you don't know how to fight within popular opinion and political legitimacy, you're not going to win an asymmetric war. So why do you need populations? You need populations to be able to manipulate popular opinion. Why did they go to Bolivia to perhaps maybe start talk about the potential planning of this caravan? Not because the route for going there or there's logistics, it's because the Bolivians the Morales government has a particular experience on using populations to topple governments. They did that in 2003. In 2003, the Cocalero Federations toppled the Goni administration in Bolivia through social movements and protests. And that manipulated that to this day. To this day, there's legal cases in international courts that are going after that former president back in the day for things that happened more than a decade ago. This lawfare is a big part of this. I think one of the ideas of these caravans was to get to specific borders and to create human rights cases. Now, I'm not saying to create human rights cases. That means to push human rights violations. They try to provoke, and I think Secretary Bartlett talked about, they try to provoke the Guatemalan authorities. They try to get the Guatemalan authorities to fire upon them. They try to get the U.S. authorities to fire upon them. Not the majority of the caravan, the migrants, but a small portion of them. And then the problem is, in anybody who's been in any kind of conflict or war, I mean, it's chaos. I mean, there's, you saw the scenes of some of the stuff that was happening in Tijuana in the earlier part of the caravans. It's complete chaos, and the migrants don't know what's going on, so they're just running around everywhere, and there's casualties along that. I believe when I was there was at least 2 people that died on the border between Guatemala and Mexico. And so this manipulation of populations to use asymmetric warfare against its adversary is fundamentally designed not to attack the United States with a missile or with a bomb. It's to delegitimize the United States in Latin America. To make Latin America think that the United States is racist, it's xenophobic, it doesn't like Latinos, it's trying to build a wall against Latinos. But the reality is the wall is nothing, the wall is more than a barrier or anything that divides. It's symbolic. It's symbolic. To steal a concept from Charlie Kirk, it's symbolic on where bad ideas end and good ideas begin. Because there's a reason people flee their countries. It's the economic and political systems that have failed their countries is why they're moving. So we have to be able to symbolize that sovereign bloc, that sovereign border. And I think Venezuela is really where that's heading towards. One of the things that I'm really concerned about, whether there's a lot of conversations this week in Washington about illegitimate presidents, Nicolas Maduro, when is he going to leave, how is he going to leave? Regardless of how that plays out, what's going to continue is the refugees. And probably is going to intensify, particularly if there's any kind of conflict. And when you get the refugee situation go from 3 million to 6 million to potentially 8 million or more, as the Brookings Institute has forecasted, combined with 30,000 or so that are massing on the border with Panama, combined with the Northern Triangle and the tens of thousands of migrants, that is a huge destabilization element in Latin America, unlike anything you've probably ever seen, and only have seen in places like the Middle East and Africa.
Let me ask the 3 of you another question. So there are some political changes going on in Latin America. There has been new elections in El Salvador, which has changed the ideology in the government, or not. The Venezuelan government, the legitimate government of Nicolás Maduro is in real trouble. Would that be enough, to change the ideological orientation of some of the countries that have been planning, financing these caravans, or what should happen in order for these caravans not to continue to come to the U.S.?
First thing that comes to mind is for me anyways, the current caravan that's in just across from the Texas border. And it's interesting to me that I'm going to be joining that caravan on Thursday. So I'll be visiting with them, but in my preparation for that, I'm speaking and talking to a lot of people who are down on the border right now, is that the new Mexican administration is cooperating with us in a really, I think, unexpected way. They have this particular caravan compounded up in the former maquiladoras down there, policing them and keeping them contained so that they can't rush our border. There was a similar circumstance in Tijuana. I don't know what the ins and outs of that. I suspect, this is purely speculation, that President Trump must have issued some sort of threat or had some kind of leverage over the Mexicans to get them to cooperate in that way, because prior to that, the Mexican governments have not been all that cooperative on controlling illegal migration flow. But what's happening now is that they've got a couple thousand of them bottled up in an old factory, and the plan is to kind of meter them out, 20 at a time, come to the U.S., and it's going to take months, and they've got given them 4-month permisos, is what I'm told, and that's like a really unusual collaborative change in the Mexican government. I'm not sure what, and unexpected too. South of that, I can't really speak to with any authority except to say that the smuggling of migrants through those countries, I think, occurs with or without, mostly with or without government involvement or interest. It just simply is going to happen regardless of the positioning that any particular government takes. And I mean from Ecuador, Brazil, Colombia, Panama, all the way through. Whether they participate in controlled flow and move them through or decide to interdict and deport, they'll find a way that flow will just kind of keep coming through. So I'll just leave it at that. Mexico is an interesting.
Well, yeah, it's a very interesting and surprising result. Yes.
Well, I appreciate Todd answering that, gave me time to organize my thoughts, so I look smarter than I am. I think, I like to think with questions like that, okay, what can be done? And obviously there's no easy answer, but I like to, the best way to digest it, I think, is to look at it as what can we do in the short, what can be done in the short term, the medium term, the long term. I think the short term is what we're doing right now, beefing up security, working with allies, with neighbors. Really, the caravans, those that are in the caravans, those being manipulated, they have to understand that it will not succeed. It will not work. And I think that's going to be the immediate thing that, and we need to capitalize on that. Every time they're stopped at the border, when they're sitting in Mexico and they're just having problems there, they're not able to get to where they wanted to go, where they paid to go, or where they have organized together to go. When we begin to recognize that these caravans aren't successful, at least it will hopefully break off those that are legitimately interested in trying to get into the United States for economic reasons. Maybe they'll be dissuaded. So and there's obviously maybe layers to that, but I mean, that's a short term. A medium term is working closer and closer with political allies in Latin America. The United States has not done a very good job of keeping its eyes on Latin America. It's amazing how the U.S. government will look will look thousands of miles away, and yet we have Latin America sitting right here, and we, for whatever reason, the United States forever, it just boggles my mind, maybe because I have a personal interest, but it just boggles my mind how distracted we can become from looking at stuff within our own border. And that could be some of the history, it could be some bad blood from decades of political foreign policies, but at the end of the day, Latin America needs to be involved. And the long term is kind of going along with that is once the United States builds those inroads with these allies and it takes advantage of some of the new administrations that are coming to power, Argentina being one of them, don't leave. Stay with these allies, work with these allies. Don't, there was a president in Pakistan several years ago that had a saying, he said, working with the United States in foreign policy is like being next to a really strong river that is suddenly diverted. He said, we're strong, we're growing, we have trees, and then gone. We're barren. And so the United States has got to keep a long-term perspective on Latin America, interest in Latin America, and continue to build inroads in Latin America. I understand policies in the past. I understand there can be some friction there. When Nixon went there, obviously he was shocked at his response. That can't dissuade us in the United States from working actively with our Latin American allies. And I think to do that, one policy, and this is just another tidbit that I won't dig into, is economic freedom. Work with them on economic freedom, private property practices, things like that help Latin American countries that are still coming out from under the grips of totalitarian organizations or presidencies, administrations. Work with them on economic freedom. I really think that's going to be the precursor to real freedom and real communication and development in the United States.
Thank you, David.
Joseph? Yeah, I mean, actually, again, I agree with David in that, just an interesting anecdote. I was in Salvador about 2 years ago at a Countering Transnational Organized Crime conference that was hosted by U.S. Army South along with counterparts in the Salvadoran Army. It was a regional conference, so we had Central Americans, we had some South Americans, Colombia, Chile, I think, participated as well. And it was interesting, out of the 2-day conference that we all presented, we had tremendous ideas and strategies on how to combat transnational organized crime, on many elements of law enforcement and military, but we didn't really even talk, I don't think there was an economist in the room. And fundamentally, organized crime is an economic issue. I mean, you can't divorce that from the conversation. And I did a simple exercise because we were in El Salvador. I looked at the map of where I think one of the police put out where all the gangs were concentrated, the MS-13 and 8 and the Barrio 18 gangs were concentrated in El Salvador, and overlaid that with a map from the Heritage Foundation, actually, that does the Economic Freedom Index. And ironically, one of the things that Salvador is the lowest on the Economic Freedom Index is on property rights. It's, I think, the third worst in the world on property rights protection, and coincidentally, it's the same area where the gangs have proliferated. So that's just a quick little side note. But to answer your question, Julia, I think what Dave was saying, the regional alliances are very important. Yeah, long-term, systemic, absolutely, but I frankly don't think we have that much time. I think our decades-long policy failures in Latin America has caught up to us. And we need to pay, especially because of Venezuela, but other crises in the region as well. But we have an opportune time. One of the things I've been advocating for to the center is to create a sort of Five Eyes intelligence network in Latin America, very similar to the U.S. has a Five Eyes, that we cooperate with Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and Australia. We have, for anyone that's served the intelligence community, we have cooperation with those above and beyond any other partner. In the region we're in, we have access to each other's information. And we need that because these threats, what the Defense Department calls trans-regional threats, they move instantaneously. And I think right now we have an opportune time where you have the Bolsonaro government in Brazil, the Morales government in Guatemala, the Duque government in Colombia, the Macri government in Argentina, and the Piñera government in Chile. 5 countries that are like-minded, have U.S.-friendly posture, and have a vested interest in dealing with these threats for different reasons, but at the end of the day, for the same. And they need to be able to share things a lot quicker. Last thing, just to kind of move back to El Salvador, and actually, let me just say one more thing on that. Corruption is a problem, absolutely, in Latin America. We're going to have to deal with corruption, but that's a long-term systemic problem. We're hoping these caravans aren't that. They're not a long-term, they can't do these caravans for 15 years. This is really now. This is happening now, and it's happening for a particular reason. So this alliance that we can try to build in the region has to deal with the immediate threats first before we look at the long-term systemic threats. And we can't let things like, if there's a corruption in one of these countries, we can't let that get in the way of the strategic value of having our alliances with them to be able to deal with the bigger threats. And within that, there's other governments in the region, I think, that are also U.S. friendly, but we have to be very careful. Each country is fighting their own battle. I just came back from Salvador, and although I want to be optimistic about the new government, the Bukele government, I haven't heard good things, to be honest with you. There are connections to Jose Luis Merino, who is an individual that was from the FMO, in the FMO land, that was involved with money laundering, massive money laundering operations through Alba Petroleos. And it was tied to Tarek El-Assami from Venezuela, tied to the FARC in Colombia. And so one of the things that I think concerns me is, and I think this is something that happens repeatedly over and over, especially in Latin America, is strategic deception. We constantly get fooled. We think, we look for that unicorn, we look for that perfect partner, and we think we found them, and then we invest into them, and then we get built. I'm old enough to remember when people were very aspirational to Hugo Chavez. Here in Washington, where people thought maybe he was a good partner, or they, even Evo Morales from Bolivia, people thought, people said, we don't know. Maybe, I remember I was at a conference in 2007 where they called him the Nelson Mandela of Bolivia, of South America. They said maybe he's the hope. And I said, well, his party's called Movement Towards Socialism, so that gives you a hint at where he's going to go. And I think in general, we have to be a little bit smarter about how we're being deceived in particular countries, because I think that's been one of the things that the Cubans and the Venezuelans have been very good at over time and have taught other governments how to do.
Thank you, Joseph. Secretary Duarte wants to say something about it. What should we do?
Thanks again. So I'm going to start with something that I don't know if people have thought of, or they've thought about it anyway. What happens if all these migrants have been contaminated with some sort of pathogen? Now they are with some sort of disease.
Oh,
What if? Are they not weapons of mass destruction? Do we not get contaminated? Do these countries have the capacity to check them? Does the United States have the capacity to check them? We don't know. We just have to be careful. We have to take those things into account. Now, what can be done? We need to work and strengthen honest and willing partnerships. We have to work with those that are willing to work, but we have to see eye to eye and work together and build up the capacities, mutual capacities. Probably Latin American countries don't have the technological advantages of the United States, but we do have people, willing people to work. We have people that are going, like I said, 200 nautical miles into the sea, people that will risk their lives. We have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that we can share and are willing to share. Now, what else can be done in the interim? Help and assist the countries to create the capacities to develop, but don't force development in these countries because you don't know what these countries really need. And that's one of the failures of foreign policy that the United States has had in Latin America. And someone used, I don't know, I think it was with you, maybe it's resentment, at least not from the conservative countries and the conservative populations, which are the most part in Latin America. We were willing partners through the Cold War of the United States. Later on, the United States turned their back on us and allowed their partners, their friends, to actually be sent into trial and die in prison for helping the United States. What needs to happen? There is this saying, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got, right? The United States, when it comes to foreign policy, they also need new and updated partners and operators on the ground. What has happened is that big bodies of NGOs that actually are housing former guerrillas and former socialist ideologues have become now the preferred and go-to advisors and analysts that this economy uses throughout Latin America. That needs to change.
Well, it's great to have Secretary Mario Duarte here, and we appreciate his support, and it was great to see a great contingent in support from the Embassy of Guatemala here today as well. Thank you for coming. Everyone, thank you for our team here, Mark and EJ, Jason, Kylie, Allison, Sabrina, thank you all for coming today. Joseph, great job in the panel. Of course, Todd, David, Julia, thanks so much. That wraps up for today, but before we go, I did want to let you know about a couple more things for SFS. We have a new product out called the BRIC Monitor, following up on some of the things Joseph was saying today about Venezuela, Russia, Iran, and China, and what they're doing in Latin America. That's the latest SFS product called the BRIC Monitor. If you're not on our email distro list, please see Kylie afterwards, and she'd be happy to add anything to that. Also, please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We're pretty good at following folks back as well. Stay tuned for our next event, which will be TBD as far as the date goes, but most likely we'll be talking about the ongoing crisis in Venezuela and what to do about that. And Ana Julia, I hope you can come back for that as well, between Cuba and Venezuela. So
I hope it's soon.
let's hope soon. Exactly. Thanks so much to our family and friends for coming today.